Okay, so good evening, everyone. We'll have the 18th session today, and this is where we are continuing from. So, in the last session, we learned about keyframe animations and how to add animations based on transform properties of a game object or any 3D object inside Unity itself, how to add events to those keyframe animations and how to call those events and all those things. Then we implemented the concept of animation where we implemented a few different things. We added a new input asset as well, all those things. So now today we'll continue from that and we'll start with adding UI for that animation that we've added. Then we'll change the scene to be more dynamic and we'll learn the concept of spawning enemies. We have learned the concept of spawning before in previous games, but just as a different concept of how to do the same thing and in a more different sense as well. And then we'll move on to the concept of headshot, which we had initially talked about. So basically, trying to implement a different uh, collider. Then we look at health bar. There are different ways to implement a health bar, although similar concept. All you have to do is implement a way to represent or show or display the current health that you're recording already in a variable on the screen. Similar with ammo UI as well. So UI of the ammunition is more straightforward. Health bar, we'll look at a few different concepts. Then pickup system will again be very straightforward. Uh, we'll look at different ways of implementing it, some concepts of how you can implement events and other things in the pickup system. Then player respawn will, there are again hundreds of different ways of doing everything. So we'll look at one very straightforward way of respawning players by actually respawning or reloading the scene, the complete scene, so from scratch. But obviously there are better ways of doing that, but we will discuss it but not implement it because we are short on time. And then saving some basic data using player refs, which we have learned before. So how can we input some data and save those data, all those things. So now moving on. Cool. So this is where we have had left things in the last time. Let us see what all we have and what all we did implement till now. So we are able to shoot and then we are able to reload as well. So this is one glitch that I noticed a bit later. Like when we implement this shooting where this thing is implemented, the effect for the wall essentially or the metal effect that we have added. So there you see some pink lines coming out. So that is part of the particle effect, but I think I made a mistake while exporting it from the other uh, part. I left out a dependency. So if I see here, it, So it's actually would be here somewhere. Weapon effects, VIPS, bullet metal. So I think I left something here. There's a material missing, I think, which I left off. So when you are exporting, this is why I said to be mindful of the dependencies that are there. I probably missed another, like I deselected a folder while exporting. So this is something that you can fix while you're exporting. And this is something to keep note of while you export some uh, common thing from one place to another you're taking. Just make sure to include at least the dependencies that you can that you know of. So, and you'll probably figure it out in some time if there's something missing or whatever, and then you can just bring that one single uh, missing entity here. So try and fix this on your own. I am leaving it as it's right now because that is not really causing any functional problems for us. So moving on, what we would like to implement is, so right now what I was trying to show you is that we have this player setup and we have, let me bring this here. So we have a root script, player health, so something's wrong, I guess. We have not updated the, so just to keep it here, I'm doing this so that I can see it properly over here, that I have a health script and I have a shoot script. So in my shoot script, I have ammo and all those things. So what we want now is when I'm actually in my game, I'm shooting and I can see that my current ammo is decreasing and I have a max ammo, which is like the maximum that I can carry in the gun, and there's a maximum that I can carry anywhere. So what I would like to show is this by this, and maybe somewhere this also I would like to represent on the screen, right? So, or maybe just like maximum, I know that it can be 12, so that I don't need to show. And then while this is reloading, we can refresh that. So for doing this, I will go to the canvas and I will create a new create empty. We can create a panel for this if you want. So panel is nothing, just a like a image which is there. We can remove the image if you want, like basically just a holder kind of a thing, or we can remove the alpha channel of the image. That also helps. Like maybe if you want to give a background to it later or something, so we can use this. And then to implement this, there's a 2D icon here. If you click on this, you'll go to the 2D menu, which I hope by now you know. 2D, you'll be able to see the screen in 2D. And once if you click it again, you'll be back to 3D view. So inside a 2D view, let's say I can resize this panel to a size that I want. So let's say somewhere around here, like I want my value of the gun to be implemented. Let's make it bottom only. So maybe somewhere around here. So let us fix these values. And I can actually, instead of stretch, I can change it to bottom right. So shift and alt, and then bottom right, the anchor position, and then position X can be 0, and I can give it a height and width to basically fix here. So I can give it a height of 300, width of 300, and a height of 200. So this is where I would implement the uh, text of my guns. So I will have inside this, I will have two text And for text, we'll use Text Mesh Pro. So if you remember this, I think we have used it somewhere before. We need to import the TMP essentials. We can also import extras and all those things. But for now, TMP essentials are fine. And in this text would be a text for ammo. So we can basically just have one text only. We can actually ideally have multiple texts and push one value each to each text. But what we'll do is we'll change those things in script, and here we'll push only one value only. So here, let me just make this fit the panel, and then again I can shift alt, same thing for this, and position 0 for the text. I can change it to ammo. So what we'll represent here is current ammo upon max ammo. Max ammo is basically the maximum that you can have in your gun. So change a few settings here, and maybe have the auto size for font, which will be the best fit that we can get. So this is something that will show up for us. And now we'll actually implement the script to add this. So just now we can go to our script, the shoot script, and inside the shoot script, we'll basically just put those values there. So let me create a new variable for this. Display. So for this, we'll need a Text Mesh Pro UGUI, this thing, and let's call it text or whatever you want to call it. And what we'll do to implement, obviously, again, there are multiple ways to implement it. Ammo text needs update wherever there is reloading happening, right? Or whenever there's a fire happening. So we can implement it in shoot. But to make it like more straightforward, more uh, robust, like obviously not the very correct way of implementing it, but the very quickest way of implementing it would be to add it in the update function, because it will run each frame. So wherever values change, this will update on its own. So what we can do is ammo text dot text equals to, and this is where we can basically do current ammo dot toString. So what this will give us is the value of the current ammo, and then we want like this sign, and we can give some space here. Then again we want maximum ammo, or we can have carried ammo, depends upon what we want to see. Let's try this first. So this is all that is there, and let's see how this looks. So now if I go to play mode, I didn't assign the text there. So all I have to do is basically assign this ammo text. And when we press reload, this updates. So yeah, so this is all that's there. Obviously, now that we have added it to update, this is being called every frame. So generally, it is good practice to avoid that. So what we could do instead is basically call it wherever wherever shooting is happening or wherever reloading is happening. So we can have a function. Let us try if we can implement it straightforward. So instead of having this thing update, let's call it update ammo display. And this function basically what we'll do is call whenever the shoot function happens, it will be called whenever reloading happens. After the reload, it will be called. So reload is basically happening from here and there's a countdown and everything. So after this whole function, what we can do is actually call it after the reload. So for doing that, we cannot add it here. Now let's see if this works. So input is working and then reload. Reload is not working unless we press on shoot. So to make reload work, we can call it instead of here on reload is going to reload and reload is calling this coroutine. Inside this coroutine, all this is happening, blah blah blah. And we can just do it wherever the trigger is called. So after the trigger of the animation is called, then this happens, and then right after this we can call it. So this is where we can call it. Let's see if this works. And we'll obviously have to call it in the start function as well. Still not updating there properly. Update ammo display should update. So yeah, so this is something that will take time to maybe properly implement. That is why, because right now it's just two texts and we can implement it there. Obviously, there's other things at play. It should have worked here. I don't know why it's not updating. Uh, Something we'll have to fix maybe. But very straightforward to thing to do is just use the update function, and that is what we'll do for now. We can try it out later if you want, but at other places also we'll be using update to basically quickly implement these things so that functionalities are implemented. But make note that this is not the most accurate practice of implementing these things. You need to reduce the number of draw calls basically, and draw calls, the more update functions that you use, the more draw calls you're calling in a sense. But this is working perfectly for us. So just a quick recap of what we did. We created a new text, centered it here, all those normal things. Then we basically created a new a variable in our shoot script in the in the update function. We basically just displayed those values. So kind of pretty straightforward, but obviously a more complex method of implementing it and a more optimized way of implementing it would be to call the update function, uh, call the display update function at places where you know that it is going to update, so that it is only being called at specific frames and not each time. So cool. And next we can move on to what do we want to do next. we want to implement spawning enemies. So let's start doing that now. Save it. And what we want to implement in spawning enemies is basically that we have this one enemy. And what we can do instead of having one enemy is multiple enemies, and they're coming from random locations somewhere inside the game or inside this. What we'll try and set up is that we have this big room uh, space inside here. So what we'll do is we'll kind of set up a trigger sort of a thing where basically this doorway will act as a trigger. Once we enter from this trigger or this doorway, there will be enemies that get activated. And in this activation will basically be instantiation in a sense, which we have done multiple times now, instantiation. And we'll instantiate enemies at multiple places from here and everywhere else, right? So to start with, what we need is to basically add a trigger here. So for adding a trigger, what we'll do is add a cube here. So let us do that. And for now, I can turn it off. And inside here, I'll add a 3D object. So I can add an empty object and then add a collider to it, or I can just by default add a cube and then remove the renderer from the cube. And let's call it spawn trigger. Set it up. So this is where we would want it. There's a function that I wanted to talk about here is basically this game object move to view. So Control Alt F. So if I have this selected and then I press Control Alt F, that object will move to the center of my view. So if let's say I'm here and I want the object to move here, then I'll press Control Alt F. So in case you generally like if I'm let's say somewhere here and then I create a cube, it gets added somewhere there, but I want it to be here, then I'll go to that specific place and then I can do move it to the camera viewpoint basically. So that's pretty handy when you have a big environment and stuff. But right now we don't have that condition. So just quickly setting up the trigger. What we can do is basically scale this. So let's just cover the whole doorway. Like this. And let's see from here, this is too wide. We can shorten it if you want, something like this. Won't really matter much, but yeah. So basically, and then basically what we can do is remove the renderer. So we have created this trigger and all of the doorways covered. Uh, like you can't pass through it without actually triggering the doorway. So next what we'll do is add some spawn points inside the room, which will basically be small points which just are there from which the enemies will emerge. So maybe one point here. So let me change the name spawn point 01. Remove the mesh renderer, bring it a bit up. and turn on the if trigger, or I don't even need the collider for this spawn point. I just want the point basically. I don't need all these things. So here it doesn't matter if I have the trigger on or not, but for trigger we'll have the trigger on, and we'll talk about why later. And we've already seen this, but just as a reference, I'll come and turn this back on later on. So this, and just replicating few of these points, maybe one here. So this will be spawn point 2, and then maybe one more towards the end of this, which would be our spawn point 3 somewhere here. So spawn point, sorry, and I can create a empty parent for all this. So for doing that, I'll just select all the three and right click and create empty parent, and they'll all come inside an empty parent. So ideally, all of them should be at some positions. Great. And then I can just refer to this as spawn points parent, or spawn points, whatever is straightforward. I don't think we'll need to use the parent object, but just in case. So box colliders are off, mesh renderers are off. You can even remove the components if you want. We don't really need them. Even the mesh filter can be removed. Similarly for these. So we just needed the point of origin in a sense. We just need the transform. That's all. So next, what we have to do is create a new script, and we will call this new script as enemy spawner. Inside this script, we will have to add a few things. So one of the things is going to be a public game object of the enemy prefab. We can call it enemy prefab or enemy to spawn or whatever. And then another public transform. So the points, the spawn points, and an array of those spawn points. So spawn points. Now here we can use the concept of getting the parent spawn point, spawn point parent, and then basically extracting it each in compile time and then spawning at that point. But it's pretty straightforward to use it like this as well. And then we can have a on trigger enter function. So this on trigger enter function, and we have one more function that is like this, is on collider enter function. So on collision enter function works when you have not turned on the trigger point. So this will basically act as a collider if the trigger is not turned on. And if the trigger is, and what does that mean? What does that like tend to like have for us? So what that'll do is if I go in play mode, I will not actually be able to walk inside this. This will act as a collider. I'm trying to go inside, but I'm not able to. Right? So this is a collider. But if I make it a trigger, then I'll be able to pass through it. So that is why for our purposes, we need a trigger and not a collider. So this is the thing that we need. So going back to this is the function that we'll be using because we are using it as a trigger and not as a collider. So I don't want to use this. Inside our trigger, what I want to check is if the thing that is passing through us is this collider, which collider has passed through us. If that collider, the other dot collider, sorry, other that tag is what we'll check is equal to player. And how do I check that? I have the player here. So if this is passing through, so player capsule is this thing. If this thing is passing through, then basically I want the enemies to spawn. If anything else passes through, then I don't want the enemies to spawn. What happens if I don't put this is basically if I keep this intact, when enemies come through that point, then also it will be able to spawn more enemies. So I just want it to spawn enemies once when I pass through it, depending on how you want to make your game. Obviously, you can make it however you like, but this is what I'll be doing. So spawn enemies is a function that I'll write, and let us create that function. So this is a neat trick. Like if you have a function that has not been created and you just name it like this, then you can go in, like if you're using Visual Studio, you can press control dot period, control dot, sorry. And this gives you some quick fixes. So you have a generate method spawn enemies, introduce local for spawn enemies. So this is more what you want to do. So if you click this, it will give you a method, generate a method for you. So what we want to do now is for each. So this is a function that we want to use for each. And if you uh, type for each, so let me do it again for you. So for each, and I press tab once and tab twice. So this, if I press tab twice, it'll complete the format for me. So now what I want to do is I want to add a collection and then I want to access each item. So for each spawn point, I want to spawn one enemy. So spawn points, and this can be item, can be SP. So for or a spawn point or whatever I want to write spawn. Let me just complete it. Spawn point. So for each spawn point in spawn points, what I want to do is instantiate. Instantiate enemy prefab, and where do we want to instantiate it? Want to instantiate at spawn point dot position and with the rotation of spawn point dot rotation. So if you remember, there are multiple overloads that we can use for instantiating. I could have clubbed all the instantiated enemies under one parent. So I can do that as well. I can take a enemy uh, folder and game object, and I can instantiate all of my enemies over there. But it doesn't matter right now, right? So that's it. And then let's come back here and let's see if our enemy zombie is most up to date. In our prefabs, do we have an enemy zombie? Yes. Is it most up to date? No. Let us apply everything. So now we have this prefab that we can use inside the trigger script. So we'll add this script to the trigger. And where is the script? Enemy spawner. And inside the spawner, we want to pass the enemy prefab. So enemy zombie, and then spawn points. So spawn points, the easier way to do is like one way is that you, sorry, drag here and then they show up. A more easier and more efficient way to do this is go to this upper right hand corner. There's a lock button here. So while you have spawn trigger selected and you have the script open, press on this lock button. So what this does is now wherever you click, whatever you open, the inspector is locked. You won't be able to see anything else in the inspector window. So for this to work, this is how you have to do it. And then press on this and shift this. So now all three are selected together. All three can be added here. And then you can unlock it. But what happens if I don't block it? Then if I select this and select this, this changes. So if I want to add multiple points or multiple things to a single script or a single variable, something like this, what we just did, I'll have to use the lock function in the on the top right corner, and I can log the inspector. So now ideally we have set up everything. So let's see if this works. So once oops, I fell down, my bad. I don't think we have a fix right now for if we fall down. We can do game over in that case. So once I go through here, oh, they are being spawned, but they are uh, this not active because our this thing is not active. So now if I go here, if I do this, yeah, this is still active. So I didn't like this override. I don't have to apply this inactive override because that is not something that I want. Again, going back there. Yep, spawn two enemies. So that I was not able to shoot that enemy initially. Why is that? Because if I go here and turn on this mouse, looks like, and if I choose this, so I've killed this enemy first, and the other enemy was behind this, but this collider was coming in between. So when I was shooting, it was still checking, trying to shoot this enemy, which is already dead, and we have applied uh, some scripts to not shoot after it is dead, right? So that is why what we'll come back and fix this bug. I hope you understand what bug I'm talking about. That if one enemy is dead already on the ground, his collider is still standing up, right? And when if another enemy is behind this collider, then we are shooting essentially in the air. We are not actually shooting at the enemy behind this collider. So we'll come and fix this bug right after this. And there's one more kind of a bug, you would say, that this creates for us. So what happens is if I go here, you see there are three enemies. If I cross again, more enemies. If I cross again, more enemies. So right. So what is happening is that each time I am crossing, yeah. So this might actually be good for your game, but what is happening essentially is that each time I am crossing, where is my crossing point? This point. I am crossing this point. The collider is still active. This thing, the trigger is still active, right? So if I want, I can, and if I want, like the way that we are setting it up, I would want it to deactivate right after the first collision or the first trigger that happens. So for that, what we'll do is very small function inside the once this has been activated and this is my player. Oh, sorry. We'll have to get the trigger component, I guess. So for getting that, we'll need to add a public or not required public. You just need a collider trigger and we need a start function. Inside the start function, we'll do get component collider and this will be our trigger. And all we need to do here is trigger dot enabled equals to false. Or I could have just done this get component collider dot enabled is false. That also that I think is more straightforward. We can try doing that as well. So now what it will do is now let's see. I've kept this open for you guys to see. Box collider disappears. Okay. So now if I continue this thing, more enemies will not be created. But we found a new bug. So this no bug basically. I thought there was a bug that I was seeing. Apparently not. Let me just quickly recheck. I thought I saw. Yeah, I did see. So this is basically something is happening here. There's a basically this is acting as a collider for the uh, for our wall effect, which was also in the shoot script and this thing. So debug hit something else. So what we can do is we can create a tag for this. We can create a tag here and we can call this tag spawner. So basically spawner or ignore, like we could have just made it ignore as well or something. And then when I go here, I can just do if it dot transform dot tag not equal to spawner. Then only instantiate the this thing. Otherwise, do not instantiate this thing. And let me assign this spawner. And also what I can do is instead of just debugging something else short, I can actually debug hit dot name, hit dot transform dot name to basically actually debug or log what is being hit. So spawn trigger is being hit. If you can see here, saying spawn trigger hit, but it is not being. Nothing is being created. Another thing that we can try is to keep the spawn trigger on the ignore raycast layer, and I am not sure if this works by default, but let us try it out. Ignore raycast. Yeah, this is more straightforward. We didn't have to create that spawner layer tag. What this ignore raycast layer does is basically added by default to a set of layer where basically raycast is ignored for this thing, and now we can actually go through it. So this is much more better, and this works. Everything is working as we wanted. Yeah, cool. So I think I can go ahead and not keep this for now at tag. I can just remove the spawner tag because that option is more straightforward. I can just keep it untagged. Tag, remove the spawner tag. Remove. Is it actually removed or not? It is removed. Next time the project is loaded, it will not show up in the list. And I don't need to add this. But obviously this was also an okay-ish solution. That solution is better because we are able to shoot through it to the next wall that is there. With the solution of the tag, we are not able to do that. So now we have set up spawning of the enemies. And next, what we want to do is we want to fix that bug. And one more bug we want to fix. But first, let's fix that bug. For that, we will go to let us see the structure of our enemy zombie. Let us activate it. So for now, we can deactivate the spawn trigger. So if I want to test a few things, I can activate it whenever I want. But for now, I can just activate this. And what I want to do is basically access get access to this capsule collider and deactivate the capsule collider, right? So how can I do that? I can go inside enemy AI, and inside enemy AI, I do have this thing, enemy death animation. Enemy death animation is happening here, but enemy is actually dying here. So anywhere we want would be fine. And we can also actually set up this thing more properly by actually, so like if you remember the shoot script that we created, we set it up like this. So we had a on shoot function and we had an on root load function, and then inside that we had void fire, void draw fire, dry fire, reload, all these functions inside this. So basically giving it more easy structure for us, right? So we can similar kind of setup can be done for the enemy AI as well, where what we can do is basically make three stages. So like if here, if you see there are three stages, this is the walk chase kind of stage. So we can take all this code and like we can create three functions essentially. One would be, let me create it here only first. Chase. This would be attack. And this is basically just disable. Oops. So when this happens, basically it's showing the autocomplete options and just press on escape and then do this. Otherwise, it will just keep on doing that. So now let's create a function for method for chase, and let's create a function for attack time, not attack time. This is also what we did wrong. Attack, only attack. And let's create a function for attack. And let's create a function for disable. Let us bring chase at the top and then attack. Straightforward, and that's it. Now all we need to do is basically take it from here, add here, take it from here, add here, and take it from here and add here. So by doing this, essentially, we kind of cleaned up the code a bit better, but obviously more can be done. So now what we want to do is basically disable the trigger, and that we can just easily do. We can create a similar to what we just did collider, um, capsule collider or enemy collider or whatever you want to call it, and then inside start just get access to it, get component collider, and in disable, this is where we can just, or in disable only, right? If enemy AI, if not dead and pairs it's not dead. What we want to do is basically add it. Can be added to disable because disable is called. Disable is also actually called when player is dead, so we don't want to add it there. It's better to add it here only. Or actually, it would have been better in enemy health. Uh, yes, it doesn't matter. Let's just add it here. So we'll add it here. Call it trigger. Oh no, capsule collider. Capsule collider dot enabled equals false. Let us quickly test it out on this one enemy only. If this is working, overrides do apply to every enemy. And then let's see. So for reference, I have this on. Capsule collider is on. And when I shoot, kill the enemy, capsule collider is off now. Right? So that basically helps us to actually now the functionality that we want. We'll be able to shoot enemies that stand behind other enemies. So let us quickly try it in the full run as well once. Yep, working great. So next, one more thing that we want to do in the bug fix itself is in our enemy health is just a quick thing that we want to fix that I've noted down is basically in enemy dead. Once the enemy is dead, yeah. So I actually should have made a. So this thing I'll not implement here. I will roll this back. My apologies. But because we want to in the future implement headshot, I will implement it here and I'll explain why later. So, and this I'll do public colliders and an array of colliders so that later we can also disable collider of the head shot as well for the head collider that we create. That also we can disable. So enemy colliders, we can name it, and because we'll get it from the inspector, we don't need to initialize it. And inside enemy dead, we'll create a new uh, thing after enemy dead. Here, first thing that we want to do is basically turn enemy health, sorry, enemy health to 0. And because as soon as the enemy is dead, it will basically here it will turn to negative first. It might turn to negative, so I just want to fix it back to 0. And once this happens, then obviously we are not able to shoot it anymore and all those things. But yeah, and after that we want to disable the colliders. So for disabling the colliders, we'll again use for each that we just saw. So for each tab enemy colliders, I can call this call for collider and call dot enabled equals to false. So going back here, going in the enemy zombie, bringing it back online. Inside the enemy health, the new collider is added. So for now, I just want this collider. So I can just drag drop this here. So I just got one collider. Obviously later I can update. So override, apply all, and then play. The collider is still turning off. So this is what we wanted to implement. So just a better way of doing that. One more bug fix that I have noted is player is not attacked by enemy after it is dead. So right now, let's see the player now. So this is the player health script, current health, max health. And we go here. Let me go near the enemy. So now see the player attacked and player health got down to 70, but now I'm just standing near it and it's still decreasing. So this is something that we have to fix, because we have, like, the way that we have written this is basically that the moment the enemy is dead, uh, the moment the enemy is near the player within the distance, it starts attacking, right? So we need to change that, and we need to add a function that if enemy is not dead, then only it can attack. So just straightforward here, if can attack thing, this is where we can just add not is dead, and instead of adding it here, we have this here. We can remove this, and can we remove it? Yep, because if we are checking it here and it's not dead and player is not dead, then only it can chase, then only it can attack, then yeah. Now let's go back, let's see quickly. So now health does not reduce, 100 is at 100, and that's it. Those are two bugs that we wanted to fix. And now we can take a short break, I guess. And after that, we have the headshot and the health bar and the pickup system and the player respawn. So at least these four things we can probably do today. Let's see how much we are able to do. This thing straightforward, but we'll walk through some concepts. This will also, we'll walk through some concepts. This we'll figure out, and then player respawn is like just one line, very, very straightforward, and we'll just reload the scene for now, and we'll talk about what other concepts. So maybe by today or one more session after this, we'll complete this thing, and then we can move on to XR. Maybe we'll start with AR. So you can take a break for the next